Hello, thank you for joining the Art of Writing in the Townsend Center today for a new event, A Book is Born. Prior to the pandemic, a temporality we will soon learn that is no longer operative, Art of Writing had started a series, A Book is Born, where authors and editors, authors and translators met in conversation to discuss the process of making a book. Many mention how it is necessary to concentrate, especially in the age of AI, on the process, not the product of writing a book. This series intends first to make concrete the various multiple steps leading towards a book's production. Second, the series concentrates on the collaborative dimension of a book's process and production so that we depart from the images and myths of the solitary writer enclosed in a room, separate and isolated from the world, and in communion only with the Word. I couldn't ask for a better book than Bornfree and Ragini Srinivasan to revive the Book is Born series. Their book, The End Doesn't Happen All at Once, a pandemic memoir, is authored collaboratively. The cover, which I'll show you right now, doesn't tell us which conjunction and or punctuation mark joins them. On the cover of the book, no and or comma, for example, unites or divides them. But that might just be the point. The boundaries between the two authors of this pandemic memoir do indeed seem to blur, and often at the same time to reinsert and reassert their differences and singularities. From March 23rd to 2020 to March 29th, 2023, and beyond, Key and Ragini, known in the written word as C and R, wrote a series of 100 letters where together they document their separate and intertwined experiences, senses, and sensations of and during the pandemic. In this epistolary memoir, understood both as a quote, historical document and activist call, CNR move each other to write and to listen, to live their lives together as they recast the pandemic, in the words of Adorante Roy, as a possible portal into a different world. They do not leave the world behind in their deeply descriptive and expressive calls and responses to each other. They bring the world and their world to us, intertwining the personal and political, the political and personal. In three books, perhaps three acts, entitled successively The Cave, The Portal, The Words, Key and Ragini, in Kiese Layman's words, tell a tale that is, quote, necessary and devastating, at once singular and utterly communal. It's real, it's true, it's fiction, and it is absolutely as honest a book as I've ever read. Another author notes The End Doesn't Happen All at Once is a quote, record of friendship, a novel in letters, a penetrating investigation of identity and risk, a manifesto for a more just and caring world. Now, there's a story behind the book. There's a backstory, as it were. The authors of The End Doesn't Happen All at Once met as graduate students in UC Berkeley's Rhetoric department. I believe I believe one of the first seminars they took together was one I taught on ancient rhetorical theories and practices. They recount their meeting thus. Quote, almost exactly 11 years prior to Friday, March 13th, we had met as newly admitted graduate students on either side of a cheese platter. We remember even years of dinners and initiation rituals and rifts and reconciliations. We remember saying goodbye together to the campus where we met. And today they return, finally and together, to the campus where they first met. Since then, both Key and Ragini have kept becoming the wonderful scholars, writers, instructors, and activists they already were when they first met. Key is co-founder of the Activist Graduate School and the co-creator of AI for the People. Bornfree has taught at Bard, Princeton, and New York State prisons, and is assistant editor of and regular contributor to The Philosopher magazine. Ragini is Assistant Professor of English and Transnational Asian Studies at Rice University, a scholar of Asian American, South Asian Anglophone literature, and the author of the recently published Columbia University 2025 titles Overdetermined, How English Literature becomes Ethnic, Postcolonial, and Anglophone, and What is We? A freelance essayist, she's also co-editor of the collection Thinking with an Accent. They are both mothers, and as one critic put it, this memoir is, quote, radical mothering in action. Not only that, the end doesn't happen all at once and acts in writing, as Ragini names it, durational performance art. We're honored today to have Marianne Constable in conversation with the authors. Marianne Constable is Distinguished Professor of Rhetoric at UC Berkeley. She's the author of Our Word is Our Bond, How Legal Speech Acts, among other works in law and the humanities. She regularly teaches a course on language, truth, and dialogue and has won, with good reason, various mentoring awards, most recently from the Law and Society Association. I believe she also taught Key and Ragini and a rhetoric graduate
In
student
their first year.
seminar in their first year. Probably, and we're fortunate to have some of her undergraduates, I hope, from the course Language, Truth, and Dialogue joining us today on the live stream. So just to let you know, everyone, the conversation is going to go for 30 to 40 minutes. Then we'll have a Q&A from the audience, which will pull questions from the YouTube chat for about 15 to 20 minutes. So thank you, everyone, for being here, and I look forward to listening to you.
So thank you, Ramona, and welcome, Ragini and Key. I just thought I would start simply with some questions for people who haven't necessarily read the book, and then we can build from there. So, first of all, how did you, well, as Ramona mentioned, this is an epistolary memoir, which means you were writing letters back and forth to one another on email. And I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit about how you started writing these emails to one another. It's in the book, but some people haven't read it.
Yeah, I could start. It's first of all, it's so great to be here, and thank you. Um, I it was actually in Google Docs. I feel like that potentially important. We would write the letter in the Google Docs and then maybe text each other like wrote you in the doc. And so it's a different temporality, different modality than
Mhm.
email. But what
Ah,
happened was I got really sick in February 2020. I lost my sense of smell before we knew that was a symptom of COVID. And I was scared. Um, yeah, I was really scared because I was sick in a way that I don't think I had felt sick before. And as I was recovering from that, I just woke up one morning with the feeling like this is so historic and huge, and I need to connect to something real, someone real, to go through this with. And I had the idea like, oh, I can write Ragini. And so I just wrote her, I was like, do you want to do an art project with me? Do you want to write letters back and forth until this is over without having any sense of how long that was really going to be? And luckily for me, she said yes.
Yeah,
Do you
I,
want to add to
um
that?
well, I want to add, no, thanks, Key, and I'm glad you said the Google Docs bit, or I would
yeah.
have. But first, let me just also say, Marianne and Ramona, for the intro. Thank you so much for having us. It's incredibly special. I will say, I think Marianne, we took our first year rhetoric PhD pro seminar with you, Marianne, and with Ramona, and I think of you, Marianne, every time I think with how to do things with words, right?
Oh,
With, the Austin text, but also just more generally about that question of doing with words, right? So since that's what we're going to be talking about today, maybe I can flag that. But no, I mean it was early March 2020, and it was a time when, the whole world was in this amazing, I would say, transitional moment. It was horrifying, but also kind of amazing. I guess I'm using that word because suddenly nothing was normal. And, Key, who was my dear friend from since 2009 when we met in Dwinell Hall, um, you know, extended their hand to me in a way and said, "Will you do this project with me? Will you write with me?" And of course I said yes. And it wasn't, it wasn't, "Will you write a book with me?" But
Mhm.
it was, it was, "Will you write with me? Will you write to me?" And I guess in retrospect, I rehear that as an invitation, like, "Will you live this with me?" Right? This moment that we're all trying to figure out, this world historical event that we're all trying to come to grips with. And so we started writing, and yeah, it was Google Docs, not email, which is important because they're letters, and I think
Yeah.
the letterness of the letters is important to us. Um, and it was important for them to have their own space outside of our other kinds of regular communications, text messages or phone calls or emails, which we were also still sending as friends, at the time. But the letters had their own space.
Mhm.
And they built, right? They built on each other, and you could reread them if you wanted to. You could reread all of them. And we had a rhythm. They
Mhm.
were sent weekly. And I don't know. Do you remember, Key, how we decided it was going to be weekly? Did we know that right away?
I think it was part of the initial ask. Yeah, I think I
Yeah,
even
might have been.
specified like 30 minutes or something, which didn't do not for
Well,
me. It was
no,
something
maybe,
that we
yeah.
held to. But I was starting to be like, this is gonna be low stakes,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
something, a commitment we can keep. And yeah, I sometimes say like we hacked how difficult it is to write a book because we knew who we were writing to and we are accountable to one another, and there's not that delay of waiting to see how something is going to be received. The delay is quite short, it's a week or so. And yeah, so it built itself. It grew itself once we had set those parameters for ourselves.
Can you say more about how or what it meant to be accountable to one another? Because my next question was going to have to do actually with what writing to one another uh, did, or what it was like, given that both of you were already writing a lot of other things, it seems, from what you mentioned in here, not just finishing essays and publishing articles, but also journals of your own. So,
Yeah. I mean, maybe you can here. I'll sorry. I'll pick up the mic first, Key, since you were brave last time. But um, well, so this is maybe not exactly what you're asking, Marianne, but something that I think became clearer to me in again in retrospect was that not only did these letters have their own space outside of our other communications, but they also, of course, have very distinct space relative to all the other work and writing we were each doing, right? Over
yeah.
time, Key would begin, as they might share with us later in the conversation, to become more of a fiction writer, and or to focus more on their fiction writing. I was working at the same time on more on more scholarly projects. Right, I was still, I'm in a tenure track job at the time. I was at the University of Arizona, and I was trying to write, the book that would satisfy the requirements for tenure. Right, that what's called the tenure book. So I was working, in other non-fictional registers. Key was experimenting with more fictional registers, but in this space that we were making together. Right, this space of address, there was it was non-fictional, but it was poetic and literary and intimate, and you know and an opportunity to really try to inhabit the moment that we were living in, and to also write as a form of, as an act of like solidarity and companionship with someone else, right? So these are all things, again, that made the letters distinct. It made the letters, it remains distinct. It's the reason I think why we had, and Key, feel free to, rephrase or disagree, but what's in the letters is something very different from any other kind of writing, at least I've ever done in any other space. And I think we produced something, a different form.
Yeah, I'm reminded there's Francine Prose has a book about writing, how to read like a writer. And one of her pieces of advice in there, or anecdotes maybe, is that the first story that she ever published that she really liked was one where she knew who she was telling the story to. And I think we underestimate how important it is to know who your audience is. And right, like, don't you write your best essays for the teachers that you love? That you really connect with and that you want to like say something to or like show that you've learned from them. But in terms of like what it meant to be accountable to each other, I think in the first place, it actually meant that um, the writing to the other person made us each accountable to ourselves. And we
Mhm.
knew that we were going to have to reckon with the choices that we each were making. And so it was more like there was this shared space of knowing that we were each doing our best and like really, really
Mhm.
struggling to rise to the occasion in all the ways that we could. But I think it also, the other piece of that was that it came with a real responsibility to listen. And I
Mhm.
think even though we're writing, I think listening is the appropriate verb because you, in reading and rereading the other person's letters, you had to create so much space in yourself to really be a generous listener and try to hear what was trying to come through and where they were coming from. And that's part of the art of, I don't know if the art of reading is part of the art of writing. It is, right? And I think such a generous stance that we cultivated with one another, I think hopefully comes through in the letters, was a big piece of what I would say it meant to be accountable to one another on the page.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, how do you think that you needed to be generous? Like, do you have examples of that, of what it means to be generous with one another or with yourselves? Because there's even that little part later on where you talk, where you have a question to one another about whether you can relieve yourself or the other of certain kinds of self-doubt. So this question could lead into another question about whether and how much C and R in the book are each of you as authors, or whether there's a kind of melding that happens there.
Hmm.
Mm, two separate questions. Maybe I'll take the first piece. I think it's my turn. And maybe Ragini will take the second piece. In terms of like anecdotes about why we had to be generous with each other, like there's spiky
Mhm.
bits. Like we love each other so much, a- and we disagree,
Mhm.
and so there's I think appropriate to what we're talking about being accountable to each other. There's one part in the book where I'm wondering aloud, like, oh, is neurodivergent a label that fits for me, or that like explains some pieces of why I am the way that I am, or making the choices that I am to be extremely cautious about COVID and to like um, hold faith with some of the precautions a long time after other people had let go. And and in her response, Ragini broke the fourth wall and like started bringing in the idea of like an external reader, and like something in what I had said provoked in her the idea that like, oh, how would somebody else read this who wasn't inside of our
Mhm.
conversation? And in a way that felt a bit violent. I think I understood why she did it, but also it felt like, well, hey, like we're cultivating this like intimate little corner conversation, and all of a sudden
Mhm.
there's this external eye who's part of the judgment or the reckoning. That's like a spiky moment where I think some generosity was called for on both sides. To give a flavor, maybe that gives a flavor of
Yeah.
some of the conflicts and the ways in which we had to make space for each other.
Can I build on that? But maybe by and yeah, that was spiky and violent, I would say. And I think, but and in a since I completely without planning it, invoked Austin at the top of this conversation, right? To go back again, Marianne, this is me going back to Dunell to our room, right? Like what, like being misunderstood is a condition of all
Mm,
communication, right? I feel like that's something that we talked about in our class. So sometimes you say something and it misfires, or it doesn't land, or it's taken up in some different way. And then you have to, if you're listening, right? If
Mhm.
you're trying to ethically respond, and if you're trying to give the benefit of the doubt, then those are all, practices of accountability, as Key said, to the other, but also to oneself. But if I could just add one thing, sort of maybe moving back a little bit for folks who are listening who haven't read the book, which is, I'm guessing, most people, just to sort of say a little bit about what the book is again, sort of from the beginning, right? So it's 100
Mhm.
or so letters that we wrote over the course of almost 4 years from, what was understood to be the start of the pandemic, right? From March 2020 through a period in which, a period of what we would still consider sort of chronic COVID, but a time in which most people had, quote unquote, returned to normal for a variety of reasons that we, in a certain sense, explore throughout the book. But what we were writing about was not necessarily or even exclusively COVID, right? But it was about our lives and our effort to as I think he said this just earlier in this conversation already, right? To like rise to the moment, right? To rise to the occasion of an opportunity for transformation and presentness. And that meant that we were each making different decisions, like whether who to see or who not to see, what kind of work to do, when to be in person, how to handle our professional choices, how to parent our children, how to be partners to our partners. I mean, again, so Key was giving this the example of a question of neurodivergence that they raised, and I said, essentially, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a spoiler, but I said, the breaking of the fourth wall. Yeah, it was about a lot of other things that had built up until that point in the book, but it was about my reaction to their effort to identify themselves, right, in a very particular way, and that's what the whole book was, which was both of us struggling in different ways to arrive at new identities or changed identities or like re-articulate existing identities. And last thing I'll say about this, and pass back the mic, Marianne. I mean, one of the challenges of this book, right, because we call it a memoir, but it's a dialogue, it's a conversation, but it's each of us trying to tell, quote unquote, our story while being acutely aware in every moment that it is being received, and then needing to deal with the way the story is being received and maybe also judged. And even if it's by someone who is judging, through friendship and love, there's still, right, there's an act of judgment when one receives, I chose to do this, I didn't choose to do this. So I thought, yeah, it was. I mean, I describe it at some point as like looking into the sun, and it's not just because COVID became a subject you weren't supposed to write about, but because that the level, I think, of intensity, even in lines in our book that don't maybe read as intense on first reading to the outsider, some of it was harsh.
The book is definitely intense. I think that line that you mentioned about looking at the sun comes towards at the very end, when both of you are framing the book then as a gift, in effect, to your respective children. So there's actually, while you're writing the letters, I take it, until you decided, which I want to ask you, let me ask you about that. How did you, at what point did you decide that it might be or could be a book? And then I'll move on to the rest of who your possible audiences are.
I went on too long, so I'll take it first and be really brief. In my recollection, it was about a year into our writing to each other.
So it was, yeah.
So,
This
early, relatively
March.
early in the second March. And, I think and I'd be curious, for those who are listening to this conversation, and I think that was a real important moment for a lot of people, when they were taking stock of what has this COVID year been? What has this pandemic year been? A year is a long time. And as we too were taking stock of that, that's when I remember we decided, actually, there's something really beautiful and special here. And maybe it's something we would want to share with others. Key, I mean, is that what you remember?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I always had a sense in some way, even though it was private, that it was going to be of broader importance or broader relevance. So even though I was always writing to Ragini, I think there was a small piece of me that also knew I was writing for the future or the children or someone bigger. But yeah, it was about a year in that we started doing things like we started putting titles on the letters. And then so we started talking about, at some point we started talking about things like narrative arc and like dividing the book into the three sections that Ramona mentioned: the cave, the portal, and the woods. And looking for, towards the very, very end of the process, we started reading with an eye to what were the things that we took for granted because we know each other's backstories. I know, Ragini's husband, Brandon, and has these immunosuppressed conditions, but that might need to be spelled out for external readers. So we started doing little edits like that that still kept the integrity of the text and the, it was really important to us that we not import anachronistic knowledge of
Mm.
things that we became clear later into earlier parts of the text. So there was a real fidelity in the editing process where we only really wanted to add things that were necessary for, readers who were each other. So those were the things that kind of took it from here's a Google Doc with our letters back and forth into a kind of a shaping of the clay into something more book-like.
Mm. So that roughly corresponds with the beginning of the portal. The middle section is when you
Yeah.
start thinking of it a book. And actually, what I thought that I noticed, but I could be wrong, is that Ragini's letters there start being more explicit about world news. I mean, you're both already aware of things happening in the world, but I thought there was a change at that point. And then I thought there was another change maybe in like spring of 22 when you suggested that the portal might have closed. And what I would, and so can you say a little bit about sort of writing through the portal or what you use this line from Arundhati Roy, and maybe you could say a little bit more about what it means to you and how it helped you to shape the book and then to think about how to write the book.
Yeah, the portal was like our secret name for the book or like our original title for it. That's how we talked about it to each other for most of the book's experience. And then our editors suggested, uh, maybe they suggested we hate the title. Maybe they suggested this title doesn't say anything to people about what the book is. And then we ended up being very happy with the title that they suggested. But yeah, the portal, we I think seized on that as the promise of what this experience could be, that amidst the devastation and the suffering, that we could walk through into a different world. And I think that's part of also what most deeply explains why both of us kept writing and kept masking and kept up the faith is those, in a paradoxical way, all those restrictions had a weird freeing effect for me, where it became very obvious to me that and things that we knew abstractly from reading Foucault, like the normal was always very contingent, and it could be the world could have been a very different way. And overnight, in 2 weeks, we saw, no, really, capitalism could be essentially suspended. We could all get lots of money from the government, like essentially a basic income. And so the restrictions were freeing for me. It made me feel like, yeah, like this is a transformative moment, and we would be so wasteful if we didn't seize this moment and try to transform the world, try to transform ourselves, try to uh, take more of our dreams and instantiate them into reality. That's what the portal meant to us, and that's what we were, I think, always writing about. And that's even though it's a book about the pandemic or occasioned by the pandemic, as Ragini sometimes puts it, like it's a book about transformation, and trying to enact that portalness that was always there as a potential.
Yeah, no, I would co-sign everything you just said, Key, so I won't repeat it other than or two things. One, to say that, yes, the Arundhati Roy essay from April 2020, The Pandemic is a Portal, is a really kind of beautiful and iconic piece that I think we need to read and reread, all of us, the sort of grand we, right? And thinking about what we lost. I wrote an essay about Key and my project in that context called "The Pandemic Was a Portal." That is a hat tip to the Roy, for the philosopher, because of all the things that Key said. The one thing I would add, is that, and I think the writers in the extended Zoom room and YouTube room, I think will know what I mean. And Key, I think you would say the same thing, but I guess I'll speak for myself. I mean, this book is what I have understood and I always describe to other people as a lived-in book. So it is true that the book was about the portal in all the ways Key just said, but I think there's also a way in which the book itself, I think this was already said, but I'm trying to repeat it in a slightly different way. It was the portal. Like writing the book
Mhm.
was the portal. And I try to
Mhm.
thematize that a little bit in one of the sort of plot points that, Key and I discussed intentionally, sort of bringing to the fore, which was the fact that while we were writing, we were each going through professional transformations. I was trying to leave my job for another similar job, and Key was trying to leave the field entirely, right? Or discuss and thinking about it and then doing it. And so we were each going through these sort of professional transformations that had to do with, what kind of writers did we want to be? What kind of work did we want to do? Who did we want to be in conversation with? What did we imagine for ourselves, right? As folks who had shared investments in a range of things, but wanted to then enact them differently. And so I really literally in this book, like, I don't think I could have got another job or left my old position or like physically moved from state A to state B without this book. And which like by living in this book, um, I was able to like literally change, my life. And Key has a different way of talking about in their context, I think similar things or different and similar. I guess that's also what our book is all about, what's different and similar. But like, yeah, it's physically a portal. And also, sorry, one last thing. I know I always say I'm not going to say much and then I have to say more. The book is an invitation to the reader to go back in time. I just have to say that. I don't know if we've sort of underscored that enough, but the
Mhm.
book is written in real time and it unfolds in real time and it invites you, the reader, to look and say, oh, March 1st, 2021, what was I doing at
Mhm.
that time? And so in
Mhm.
Mhm.
that sense, it's like a portal back in time. It's a time
Mhm.
machine.
Mhm. It's also a memoir, which I notice is the subtitle, which surprised me.
Did it? Why?
Um, I thought that it was more of a sort of correspondence or letters than a memoir. I think of a memoir as singular, and clearly the
Mhm.
two of you were involved in this, which um, I'm curious. You talk about sort of plotting out the arc of the book. How much did you edit one another's writings or revise the writing of the letters between when you first sent them and then when it became a book?
I will say the book, I have often described the book as heavily edited and
Mhm.
yet um, in very specific ways. And by
Yeah.
heavily, what I mean is that there was a kind of recursive process of reading and rereading the book, making these light edits that Key described. But the
Mhm.
layering of these light edits over the course of 3 or 4 years, to
Mhm.
my mind, makes it feel like a very intensely edited book. Now, but I'm saying that in a slightly provocative way because everything that is in the book was written on the days we said it was written.
Mhm.
No information was added that we couldn't have had at that time.
Mhm.
Nothing is revised or laundered to make us look
Mhm.
better in retrospect than we did at the time. So if we were mean and judgmental in March 2020, we're still mean and judgmental today on the page. And I have gotten plenty of flack from people in my family about that already. If we were doing things that in retrospect seemed like hygiene theater, we left it in there. And if we were fighting about something that made us look kind of petty, we left it in there, but we did the work that he was describing of, if Marianne is reading this and Marianne doesn't know that my child has this problem, or Marianne doesn't know that we're picking up a conversation from, a year ago, what would we need to add into the text to make that
Mhm.
intelligible?
Mhm.
And we did that, I would say, many times. We
Mhm.
went through the book, and as we were writing it, we were editing what came before. And we always allowed each other to be the final arbiter of what was said in our own letters, but we did comment on each other's letters
Mhm.
in the editing process.
Right. As the letters were already doing to one another. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
more explicitly, right, Ki? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. I mean, I'm stuck on this question of genre and whether or not it's a memoir and whether or not it's fiction, as Kiese Layman called it, and like what does it mean to write a memoir with two people in it? I just think I think that's maybe the best thing that the book does, right? Because it's so unfair. Memoirs in a sense are like the most unfair kind of book because you're like, now's my chance to tell my story, and like everybody else is just gonna show up in the way they showed up in my life, according to me. And so to write a memoir with two voices in it, I think lays bare that fundamental truth, which is that we really are who we are in relation, and that's so much more fundamental than,
Yeah.
there is no solitary self, there is no stable singular self,
Yeah.
right? Like we're just these webs of relationships. And so I think there's something about a co-written memoir that is more accurate and more fair and more difficult, and leads us to reckon with a really difficult kind of moral challenge, which is how can two things be true, right? Like,
Well,
do you want to hop in?
so yes, I want to interrupt you. No, no, just
Yeah,
because I think this is really interesting. It's almost,
yeah.
and as you know, I'm teaching this course, and some of my students might be on right now, on dialogue, and we read sort of great written philosophical dialogues. And one of our big points is that being a rhetoric course rather than a philosophy course, the author cannot simply be identified with one character, right? The author has produced more than one interlocutor who are in exchange. So in a way, a memoir, a single memoir that's written by two people is like the flip side or the inverse of a dialogue that's written by a single author that has many characters. So I think
I
that's
love
interesting.
that.
Yeah. And then we each have our many characters that, depending on our moods that day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then I don't know, Ragini, have you ever settled for yourself by Kiese called the book fiction, or have thoughts about that? I mean, we've talked about sometimes like, oh, by signing the letters C and R, we do produce this kind of self-distancing where we're producing ourselves as characters. We're producing
Mhm.
um a narrative of ourselves that in
Yeah.
some way is going to be different than whatever we are, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so in that there's a sense in which all writing is fiction and created
Yeah.
and fabricated, I suppose. But then it's all true. It's all
Yeah.
honest, which is what we
Yeah.
ascribe to memoir. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true. The line, sorry, Ki, I don't want to
No, no,
yeah,
I want the English professor to talk
yeah,
about
no,
it.
no, no, ha ha ha. Yeah, the English professor with no degrees in English. Yeah, Kiese's line, right? It is real, it is true, it is fiction.
Mhm.
And, is it a memoir? I mean, Marianne, for the record, we thought about calling it a double memoir, two memoirs, right? I mean, like, and part of the provocation is to say, I think exactly as Key said, right? It's two memoirs in relation, producing a story of
Yeah.
togetherness and division, right? Of togetherness and conflict, of shared experience and divergent experience, right? It's a story of something universal and particular, right? So all of that stuff. But why did Kiese say that? I mean, we could ask him, but I to me it resonates because yes, everything in this book is true. This lived-in book, this heavily revised book, this not this book that we wrote with this intense integrity principle, but it's like fictional in the way everything is fictional in the sense that it's a certain kind of performance, right? That it's a work of art. I mean, maybe what he
Right.
means by that is that it's a work of art, that ultimately at
Yeah.
the moment that we decided it's a book, that we also committed to a certain to the artifice of it all. And yet, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm content to also, as you would say, let two things be true and
Mhm.
sit with the impossibility of it.
I think at some point, Ragini, you call it durational performance art, or maybe you say someone else called it that. But I want to sneak in one quick question before we move to the questions from the chat, which has to do with the ending of the book. The ending doesn't happen all at once, and there are several possible points where you suggest the ending, the book might have ended, but because of editors or comments or whatever, you ended up keeping on going and being glad that you did. And then you offer us a frame in which you are, dedicating or explaining the book either to your children or to what I think you might think your future children will be. I'm not sure. So the end of the writing doesn't happen all at once. And I'm wondering if you think that there's something particular about this time, this like post-portal time or post-pandemic portal time, that calls for different kinds of writing, or whether this is in a lineage somehow, or both.
Hmm. I'm happy to go, Ragini, but I feel like it's your turn. But
No, go for
I
it.
can. Okay. Well, I think this is sort of a great place to somewhat end on or and transition into the questions, which is the question of endings. And I think as we were talking, yeah, how long are we going to keep doing this as it became clear like COVID's not going to ever end? There's always going to be COVID now. So, um, and we kind of had a sense like, oh, Ragini, Key wrote the first letter, so Ragini should write the last letter. But we actually kept writing past what's in the book. There's like a few more secret letters that are just for us.
The sequel.
I don't know, like a bonus material one day for the Netflix adaptation. Um, but when we were looking to the ending, we found like this was the place we felt like we had really said that really encapsulated kind of where we had arrived at, the conflicts, the resting places. And those were like the last two letters that we kept. And then to finish the book, we actually had to turn away from each other, in a sense, and stop writing. So that is what feels important to me about that final formal gesture, is that to end the book, we were had to turn the conversation not to one another, but to the
Mhm,
take this conversation back to our own lives, to our own children,
mhm,
to the future,
mhm,
and say
mhm.
like that's where this conversation is now going to live, is in the way that we live it with our families and our children. And that was, I think, what allowed us to give some closure on a project that was like really central and important.
Ragini, do you want to
Yeah.
finish before I thank you?
No, I mean, I'll just add that, you know, it's a memoir, but a book, right, in which, as has already been said, we spent a lot of time thinking about plot and narrative arc and characters and drama and what were the central events going to be. And one of the things that, part of the bookness of the project was that books have to end somewhere so that we can send them into the world in a
Mm,
volume that people can carry around. And so actually we ended it and we ended it and we ended it again in a way that I think quite explicitly and intentionally mirrored what was happening, sociologically as people kept declaring the return to normal. Oh, wait, there's Omicron. Oh, the return to normal. Oh, wait, there's, such and something else. And, there's vaccine, I'm going back in time now, right? But vaccine escape, the Delta variant, that's all the pre-stories of Omicron. But it never ended. And then at some point, right, we end up with endemicity. And we also, at least in the US context, go from Trump 1 to Trump 2 with COVID in the middle, right? So where exactly did we quote unquote end up? And so I do think that formally the book actually kind of provides a way of reliving that experience. It kind of mirrors, right, that ending, that ending, 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 not ending. And the book, I think, ends on the note of no end.
mm,
I don't know if that makes it sound very undesirable to read, but
No, it's a great, beautiful, intense book to read. And I want to close my part thanking both of you for doing this. It
Thank
was
you.
really wonderful to see you again, and pass it
Likewise.
back to Ramona and Adele.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Marianne.
much. That was just extraordinary. Thank you. We're waiting for some questions to go, but I'm wondering if you would like to read something to the audience. I mean, if you wanted to read one of those letters that didn't get published, that's fine. Or maybe maybe each of you could just read a section of a letter that moves you right now.
I can read. Yeah, I have something marked that I read at a different event. I'm not going to read any of the secret letters. Um, and they wouldn't be secret anymore. Um, So this is a couple minutes from the last third of the book. And one of the things I did is I founded a COVID safer homeschool co-op. And we would meet outdoors. We meet outdoors and masked because there was some very vulnerable people um in the group. And this was like a building on some of my skill work, I guess, as an organizer, but also new and departure for me. Um, so this is October 12th, 2022, and the letter is called The Strength to Be Different, writing about this co-op. It's a powerful thing I have built. At the second meetup, I was searching awkwardly for what to say, the pandemic having atrophied what small ability for small talk I had. I remembered a lesson from my Art of the Question class. Ask what you really want to know. So I brushed the forest stuff from my jeans and walked over to the moms to blurt, what I want to know is, what's giving you the strength to do this, to be so different? They seemed surprised, but they also seemed to know what I meant. One is a neuroscientist PhD dropout. For her, it is her competence in her research that keeps her masked, and the baby in her belly, and a very early brush with the virus that took 15 months to fully resolve. The other described herself as a very logical person and laughingly referenced a history of distrust of official narratives. But it seemed especially to come down to the fact that as a single parent, it's on her to protect her son. A third mother who talks to her daughters in Tamil and drives an hour to Albany each week to attend temple spoke about how being part of an ethnic religious minority in America prepared her to be part of this new masked minority. And you are? What gives you the strength to dance at the normal ball while keeping your mask on? I shivered to hear these mothers say aloud things I've mostly only heard in my own home or in these letters or on Twitter, that the pandemic is a mass disabling event, that the failure of our government goes beyond incompetence to unconscionable. So although tiny, I know the seed I have planted is powerful. Shall I keep going? Is that enough?
I
I have to
feel
make
the
it more.
drama. I need to hear more. I don't want
Okay.
you to end there.
Okay,
Well,
okay.
some we can.
I
You'll
have more.
find a
I mean,
yeah.
it's also fragile. The first day of forest school, all the kids except mine got sick. For one of them, who's been even more sheltered than mine, it was their first cold since February 2020. It was strange to be responsible, to be in the place of all the officials who I've been critiquing, who've been carrying this burden or not for all these years. I hadn't emphasized enough to the teacher to stay home if sick. I had reminded her only once, not twice, about her gapped mask. It was just a cold in the end, but we've redoubled the stringency around hand sanitizer, underlined the stay home if sick rule, and outfitted the teacher with 3M Aura masks and instructions on performing a seal test. I wrote about these changes, hygiene theater, to the parents of the sickened kids and said, we're in this together. Your kid's health is my kid's health. Which is really the lesson of the virus that most people have forgotten or failed to learn. It's probably something ex-Governor Promo said in one of his briefings way back when. That guy. Remember that guy? Okay. Um, Sometimes, like these busy squirrels around me, I go back and check on the little nuggets of our letters that I have buried in this or that file. Sometimes, upon unburying a nut, I cannot remember who wrote it. I think you may not like this confession very much. You have a healthier sense of self than I do. But risking your disapproval, I find the confusion to be beautiful. On those occasions, reading what you wrote to me is another way of reading me. Or those pieces of you have become a piece with me. Or what I wrote you seems like it could have come from you. It arrives back to me, familiar and strange, radiating through your voice, your intelligence, the strong stance belied by your slender legs, the apparent alternation of letters, actually a mosaic of language. And then I talk about Chaduri, which is one of the authors that Ragini has introduced me to. Anyways, pick this up. But
Thank you.
yeah.
Ragini, do you want to read a little?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat though, because and I think appropriately based on what Key just read. So the book is divided into three parts. We've been repeating the cave, the portal, the woods. And then in between each of these parts, there's a little section that we co-wrote of questions. And I think, Key has taught a class. We were talking about this before we all got on today, the art of the question, right, Key? Key has invited me in different ways to think about questions. They invited me once to write an essay for an issue they were editing called Questioning Power. What questions should we be asking? And this is a book in which we really are, and again, I'm ventriloquizing Key here in the spirit that they just said, right? We were thinking about what it meant to live the questions that COVID was giving us to live, right? To hear them, to understand them, but also to live them. So I say that because in these intervening sections between these books, we have, 2 pages of questions, and we don't identify them as from C or from R. But they are actual questions that we each wrote in the book. So you won't, they're our questions, and they're not identified. So I'm going to read one of those sections. It's not that long. This is this is right at the start of book 3, The Woods, which begins with a letter written in June 2022. So what precedes it caps off a section that ends in spring 2022. Are we still in the early months? Will we allow ourselves to be? Will we become infinitely elastic and yielding, or be stretched until we snap? Will things get unstuck, or will we all just fall off a cliff? What is the question I should be asking? What work is worth attempting? How to write these letters? How to love the kids? If we belong nowhere and to nobody, how will we model and create belonging for them? How can a place that contained our lives so compactly for so long vanish so completely from my consciousness? Is the land, in fact, hostile, or have I imbued it with hostility? If you subtract all those things that formerly seemed to be necessary, inalienable parts of life, what's left? What can be removed without the world crumpling in on itself? I can't remember now exactly what Aristotle says about true friendship. Is it that if I am a real friend, I would want for you what you want for yourself? Or is it that I should want for my friend what I want for myself? Can you accept it? Can you accept me? Am I allowed to be different, or do I have to conform to your ideas of what's appropriate in order to be loved? How to open my arms wide enough to span the different realities, the ones each of us is in, the ones in each of us. What is memoir, if not the fiction that life can be narrativized, ordered, made into story? We are on the roller coaster wondering how high we will go. Will we hang out at the top, our bucket rocking dangerously, machine stuck? Or will we crash back down with a jerk or a reverse swan dive? Will we break our necks at the bottom? Will we ever get off this ride? Will I die of something mundane like a car accident on the long solo drive back? Am I being as selfish and reckless as he thinks? When the experts say the virus will become seasonal, is this what they mean? That I'll forget a life without COVID in the air is possible? Is getting COVID going to be the price we pay for a new life? Are there any other miracles to be had? The acute phase of the pandemic is over. The chronic phase has begun. Forever. COVID forever. In the meantime, will you write letters back and forth with me? It's day 791.
That deserves a round of
I
applause.
feel like we should be silent for a moment, but I'm going to end with 2 questions from your invisible audience, since the time is escaping us at the moment. So I'm going to ask them both at the same time, and each one of you, I think it will be obvious who should take which one. So question 1 is, could you elaborate on what you said about write with me being live with me? How do you see this living together in your letters, even as you're writing from presumably separate spaces? That is question number one. Question number two, Key shared we would be wasteful if we didn't try to transform ourselves. And Ragini spoke about how living in this book, I was literally able to change my life. So returning to questions of form as well as relations, as you live in the note of no end, how are your writing and relations changing now on this other side of the book? Thank you for such great questions, invisible audience.
Yeah, those are really good.
Key, go first. I just read.
Okay. Yes, speaking about transformation and what's changing in our writing and relations now, I think what this book taught me was about the transformative effects of paying attention, which is so incredibly hard to do. The media have decided we have like a 2 week attention cycle, and so they don't really cover a story for longer than 2 weeks. This government shutdown taxed everyone's attention spans really bad. And when you watch a movie too, like we're used to having the arc, the climax come, and then everything is resolved in the space of 2 hours. But the story of the pandemic was much longer than that, and so we had to pay attention for much longer. And by continuing to pay attention and write these things down, these observations down, our inner observations, our outer world, I think is what gave us the strength and the power to make the kinds of changes in our lives that we needed to make. So highly recommend paying attention despite the distractions as your tool for the transformations that you may want to be making in your life. And as for things that are changing, how our writing and things are changing right now, I don't know what the questioner was really wanting to know, but what um what's happening for me, I guess, I guess like what's changing for me is I'm still trying to write fiction, which um is wonderful and difficult. And I do miss writing the letters, and yet like their absence has also created space for I think in our relationship we've like found a new phase of our relationship too. Like I especially had a chance to go to Houston and see Ragini in her new environment, and as an English professor at the fancy corner office, and
It's a nice
um
office.
and Houston's a nice town, yeah. um and so I think we've been actually like finding our way into a new phase of our friendship too, and that's actually been wonderful.
I love
I think
that.
we,
Yes,
so,
sorry.
I'm sorry. No, please.
No, no, no. I was just gonna say, and I don't know, Ramona, if exactly I'm finding my way back to the beginning of the question about writing and living.
Mhm.
And I think I had made that point that, to write the letters together was also to have someone who was like a companion on the journey. And, there's a million think pieces out there about what an isolated time this is, how much social enemy and fragmentation, and anybody with young kids knows that it's hard. It's hard out there right now. You go to a bus stop and all the kids are standing, ignoring each other, looking at their phones. And I mean, and it sounds like cliches, but like we live in a tough time. And so a time in which it's harder than it should be to be together and be in relation and to just enjoy the kind of miraculous thing that is like a human friendship and a human conversation, right? I think it's important to say and to really revel in the pleasure of human intelligence. And so, when I said, writing together was like living together, um, we were deeply and remain, differently committed, right, to what it means to go through life with other people, right? And it's a true blessing and a real privilege, of course, right? This is one of the nice things about getting older is that there are people in your life who have seen you and known you at many phases, right? And they've known you as many different kinds of writers and so forth. And so that's something special. Ramona, you're going to want to shift your camera up if your screen up if you're there. But if I can just say one thing while you do that, separate from writing and living, because some of the listeners might be interested. a lot of people, and maybe some of you, also did a version of this in early COVID times, right? Many people exchanged letters with friends, had parallel diaries. Or I know that Art of Writing had a pandemic, series of pandemic writings, including Marianne, your own, pandemic poem and essay, in which, you were also asking really beautiful questions, right? Like, can one know one's own moment? If I can quote from that, there's beautiful books like Rehearsals for Living by Robin Maynard and Leanne Betsamasoke Simpson. The Black Indigenous Hundreds Collectives wrote a beautiful pandemic book collaboratively called Say Listen, Writing as Care. A lot of people wanted to live together, even though we felt far away from each other and were connecting on Zoom. Like, I hope our book reminds people of that desire that I think was widely shared.
Thank you. Marianne, I think you would like to talk, well, maybe you could help us think about friendship through Cicero. And you had mentioned that you're looking at Cicero's friendship dialogue.
It was just that some of the things that Ragini was saying about the questions about friendship, about whether, now I forgot exactly how you said it, Ragini, but when you were reading and you said, do you, how did you say it? Like, do
I
you
think
care more about
so I'll
having
credit
good
that
things
line
for
to
your
Key.
friends, or that your friends?
It
Okay.
was it was Key channeling
And it
Aristotle.
was about, okay. And it was about whether when you're good friends, you care more for what is good for your friend according to your friend, or whether you care more for what is good for your friend according to you.
Yeah.
And I think those are not just day-to-day questions, but also deep philosophical issues. I just was curious about that, partly because my students have read Cicero on friendship.
I think those questions came up for me when Ragini was talking about like hardening herself, like steeling herself for the job market. And I might be this is through the haze of memory, guys, but yeah, and something in me was like, oh, I want you to stay soft. Like I want to be able to reach that like soft part of you, but at the same time knowing maybe that she needed to be hard. Like that's it's a hard world. Sometimes you need to like be hard in response to the world and like have that piece of yourself to get through. Um yeah, and I think that's what made me wonder about Aristotle and like feel the departure in me for like, do I want for her what she needs, what she's defining for herself, or do I want for her what I need and want from her? And which one of those needs to be the priority? I think is that the context, Ragni? Is that how you remember?
I was trying to find it. And this is the thing. In some sense, I feel like I know this whole book by heart, but then when I
Yeah.
go looking for a certain line, I don't necessarily know where it is. I mean, there's,
It's because the
I don't,
temporality is so
yeah,
confusing.
I
Yeah.
don't think I don't remember it as job market. I mean, I remember it as, I remember it that, I mean, in general, I am maybe the hard person in a certain sense. And I had quoted Ishmael Reed's The Author Reflects on His 35th Birthday, Make Me as Hard as a Rock.
Yeah.
And it was actually after a long screed about abortion law. Is actually what it was about. There was a long bit about abortion law, and this was long before I knew I was going to move
Yes,
to
I remember
Texas.
that.
But there was a bit about abortion law, and there was a bit about collapse in Afghanistan, and Supreme Court declining to stand with Roe v. Wade, and it was about, and it was despairing like about many things, and it was so I don't remember. I think it was about Chrome Detention Center, and I mean it was me saying, ah, but then, in the book,
Mm.
Key hearing that and holding it and then responding with the philosopher's question, which I think this is in a funny way. Somebody has described this book to me, and I think it's true as actually as an ideas book, as like a book of ideas. And so yeah, it's
Fiction, memoir, book of ideas.
Yeah.
Take your pick.
What I like is how you join what one really grasps in some way as your everyday, like with the kids in the bathtub or the weather changing or what you have to deal with at that moment, getting a mask on your kid when the other kids aren't wearing them or whatever it is, at the same time as you're able to make those little things become these much bigger, more wondering about questions. I think that's one of the strengths of what you're doing there is joining those things. So I also have another way of describing the book, which is I know in a way it's, love letters, friendship letters, these kinds of things. But I also think in some ways it might be an ode to language, not just writing, but actually language, because you both are very aware of what it is that you're writing, how you're writing, who you're reading, how you're touching on other works. And I wonder if you'd like to say anything more about that. I mean, I think there's something very rhetorical about this piece.
I mean, can I just do language is the house of being mic drop and like sign off with a Heidegger bomb? No, yeah.
What is that? What do you mean by that, Key?
Well, I'm not in academia anymore, and so I don't have to answer those kinds of questions. No, there is
You
a
didn't even have to
pleasure.
bring it up.
I know. There was a lot of pleasure in there was the writing of the book was, I think, survival first, right? Like I need this. And then so
Oh,
but
yeah.
then so quickly became about the pleasure of and the challenge of like finding the words for this, and finding the layer of this that
Yeah.
could connect to, yeah, like not just the other person, but as Ragini was saying earlier, like that it is, yeah, it's different than other memoirs in that everybody lived this, and so which I think is not usually the case in reading a memoir, which is usually like this one person's experience. Like, yeah, there's particular things about our experience, but it is really for people who are alive now, like a shared experience. And so the pleasure of finding language that could um, preserve that and at the same time be transformative for us, right? Like you're doing a lot of things with the words and transmuting like the act of writing was a transmutation of the experience. So maybe that's
Mhm. I think somewhere you call it a monument to
oh
transformation or
oh
something,
I think I
right?
do talk
Do
about
you
like
say
the
that?
rock
I
and the
think
layers of rock and the epilogue type
you
thing.
This conversation dovetails with a question that came in. Someone asked, why did you choose to write rather than Zoom? Is there a kind of sense making that can only happen through the written word? So there is something now about the particularity, not just of language, but of actually writing and being able to choose these words and rewrite over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, is there something about writing? The short answer is yes. And I think in the age of, generative AI, it's important to mark that writing is, as one of my college professors said, maybe yours too, right? No thinking without writing, no writing without rewriting. Like, I think that that's true. I think it's true. I think any of us who have had the pleasure and the privilege of writing and of being read and of writing together and of being students and of being teachers, which is, all of us in this room have had those privileges. We know what that means. And then as parents of young children, I think we want to keep that alive for them. Funnily enough, though, somebody, an early an early reader of the book, and maybe this is not where we should be ending or moving toward the end of the conversation, but so hopefully somebody will ask something else that we can change it. But this book is, in addition to being memoir, novel, performance art, historical artifact, ode to language, is a heavily rejected text.
Yeah.
We shopped it around to a lot of editors and publishers, and say what you will about the US publishing industry, it's quite conservative, and some number of folks were really, really committed to the idea that nobody would want to read a book that was looking so head on at something everybody was trying to forget. And we are very obstinate, and we said, no, we're going to keep going. And one day, the world will wake up, and also it's, we believed in it. We believed in it. So it didn't, we didn't write this book. We didn't change this book to make it more marketable. We wrote the book we felt needed to be written and needed to exist in the world. Sorry, I'm losing now the thread of what I had wanted to say in response, but why did I say it was a heavily rejected book, Key? You can read
You
my
were
mind.
talking about, well, the question was about, is there something about writing? And I
Oh,
think that we would never have gotten
yeah.
those rejections on our Zoom calls for one.
No, it was a gift. Oh no, this was why I was saying it. Sorry, thank you. You returned me to my train of thought. One of those rejections came with an interesting note that we actually haven't talked about in a while, which was, why wasn't this a podcast? Right? It wasn't what this questioner asked, which is, why didn't you just Zoom with each other? But somebody said, oh, this could have been a podcast. And I think it's because there's also a way in which the book unfolds, kind of like the written version of reality TV. So
Yeah.
it is really operating on a lot of different levels, and we want, and to tell you the truth, publishers don't like that. All this ambiguity we've been talking about, in our experience, publishers were not super thrilled with, who's the author? Oh, it's two of you. What is this book? Oh, we don't know. Is it a novel? Is it a memoir? Is it historical? Does it have endnotes? They were like, this is too many things going on, which is part of why we wanted it all and stuck with it. So yeah, maybe there's a podcast here.
I want to say
Well,
credit goes to Ragini for being the even more obstinate of the two of us, like forging the way through that rejection morass.
well, I'm glad you were obstinate, and I'm glad we got to hear about all the different movements of this conversation, dialogue, meditation, memoir. There is such a deeply, as two students of rhetoric, I mean, we couldn't ask for anything more beautiful from you. Thank you for bringing rhetoric into action with this book. And everybody, please look to find your own copy of this book. And I don't mean to be an advertisement, but I am going to be an advertisement. And I'm also going to advertise, people, please keep your eye towards the art of writing. We have a website, artofwriting.berkeley.edu. We're going to have more events. And for any of the undergraduates here, we have a selection of new courses next year and workshops and internships. So we believe there's something quite unique about the written word. And I don't think this could have appeared without that. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to our audience for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Ramona
everyone.
and Marianne.
Yeah. Thank you guys
Thank
for
you so
writing
much.
this.
Oh,
Thank
you
you
for
for
reading. It's
reading.
such a pleasure to have such smart readers.
It's a true joy and honor. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
May the day, the night end well.